Have you noticed how America's electric vehicle boom has suddenly slammed into a wall? Just 2 years ago, EV sales were breaking records. Politicians were calling it the future of transportation, and automakers were racing to capture the wave. But today, growth has nearly flatlined. And here's the twist. That wall America hit? China built it, brick by brick, over decades of patient strategy, advanced technology, and near total control of the supply chain. The consequences aren't just about cars. They're about jobs, national security, and whether the United States can remain competitive in one of the most important industries of the century. Over the last 5 years, EV sales in the U.S. grew at lightning pace, until they didn't. After increasing by 40% in 2023, growth dropped to 10% in 2024. And in the first half of 2025, barely 1.5%. That's not a slowdown, that's a stall. Analysts now project that EV sales will actually shrink this year, marking the first decline of the modern EV era. Consumers are hesitating. Surveys show that the share of Americans likely to buy an electric vehicle has fallen to its lowest point since 2019, while concerns about cost, battery repairs, charging infrastructure, and range anxiety are all climbing. Policy shifts have made things worse. The One Big Beautiful Bill signed in July 2025 kills the $7,500 federal tax credit for new EVs and the $4,000 for used ones, years ahead of schedule. That means that in just months, EVs will effectively get more expensive for the buyer, putting them further out of reach for average households. Automakers like Tesla and Ford are already warning customers. If you want an EV with an incentive, buy it now, because after September, the math changes dramatically. But the real challenge runs deeper than U.S. politics. While America spent the last decade trying to nurture a domestic EV industry, China was quietly building an entire ecosystem, from raw materials to final assembly, at a scale the U.S. can't currently match. In 2024 alone, China produced over 9 million electric vehicles, more than half the world's total output. And it's home to the largest charging network on Earth. Its leading automaker, BYD, overtook Tesla in revenue, selling more than twice as many vehicles. This wasn't luck. China holds dominance in nearly every critical step of the EV supply chain. Even though it owns less than 7% of global lithium reserves, it processes the vast majority of the world's lithium, cobalt, and graphite that batteries need.
In fact, China processes 99% of battery-grade graphite, controls over 80% of refined rare earth magnets, and produces about 3/4 of the world's lithium-ion batteries. For lithium chemicals, the lifeblood of EV batteries, China's market share hovers around 60%. The result? Any automaker building an EV anywhere in the world almost certainly relies on Chinese materials. Chinese companies are moving just as aggressively on the tech front. BYD's new Super E platform promises 250 miles of range from just 5 minutes of charging. CATL, the world's largest battery maker, has developed solutions offering over 370 miles of range after a 10-minute charge. These aren't just incremental gains. They target the exact pain points that slow EV adoption: charging time, and range anxiety. And because companies like BYD control their entire production chain, from battery chemistry to the chips in the infotainment system, they can innovate and deploy at a speed U.S. firms can't match. Faced with this reality, American automakers openly admit they've been humbled. Ford CEO Jim Farley calls Chinese EV competition the most humbling thing he's seen, and an existential threat to Ford's future. Ford has set up a special Skunk Works team to design a low-cost EV platform competitive with Chinese offerings, openly licensing battery technology from CATL. General Motors is teaming with Hyundai to co-develop models aimed at Latin America, a tacit admission that going it alone isn't enough. Washington's weapon of choice so far? Tariffs. Together, the Biden and Trump administrations have layered on duties that make a cheap Chinese EV like BYD's $7,800 Seagull nearly triple in price if sold in the U.S., effectively blocking direct competition. But tariffs can't erase the cost and tech advantages China already holds. In fact, limiting component imports often raises production costs for U.S. automakers, hurting their global competitiveness. And there's another reality policymakers don't like to say out loud. At present, America simply cannot build EVs without Chinese materials and technology. New mining projects in Nevada and California are years from large-scale production. Even then, refining and processing, the bottlenecks China dominates, would still be required unless the U.S. builds that capacity from scratch. All of this puts America in a strategic bind.
Should it double down on building an independent EV supply chain, a task that could take decades and billions in subsidies, or collaborate directly with Chinese technology leaders to remain in the game now, at the risk of long-term dependence? Battery innovations like solid-state could, in theory, leapfrog China's current lead. But here, too, Chinese firms are already heavily invested, moving as fast or faster than their American counterparts. For ordinary Americans, this isn't an abstract geopolitical chess match. It's about the price and availability of the next car you might buy. It's about whether EV manufacturing jobs land in Detroit, Austin, and Tennessee, or whether the most advanced parts of these vehicles continue to come from Guangdong and Shanghai. And it's about whether the country can remain at the forefront of a global industry that could define mobility and energy use for decades. So here we are, a stalled U.S. EV market, vanishing incentives, a technological giant across the Pacific, and a supply chain that runs straight through Beijing. Protective walls like tariffs may hold back the tide for a while, but they won't stop it. The real question is whether America can or will build the capabilities needed to climb over the wall China has built. Because in this race, it's not just who sells the most cars, it's who shapes the future of transportation, who controls the critical resources, and who writes the rules of the road for the 21st century economy. And right now, China is setting the pace. So what do you think? Should the United States fight to build an entirely independent EV industry, even if it takes decades? Or work with Chinese companies to stay competitive now, even if it means relying on them long-term? Let me know in the comments, because the decisions we make today will determine not just the future of our roads, but the balance of global power.